He was 18 years old when he walked out of the system that had raised him, carrying a single cardboard box. What he would find in his grandfather's forgotten attic wasn't just a house, but a choice that would redefine his entire life. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, then you know the feeling I'm talking about. Stick with me, and maybe we can find some answers together. Make sure to subscribe, because this is a place for stories like ours. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state was concerned. For 12 years, I had been a file in a cabinet, a name on a list, a bed in a dormitory. I was Leo, ward of the state, resident of the St. Jude's Home for Boys. And on a Tuesday morning in October, with the sky the color of a dull, unwashed slate, I was handed a thin manila envelope containing my birth certificate, a social security card, $75 in cash, and a bus token. The box I carried held everything else I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book about stars, a toothbrush, and a photograph of a woman I was told was my mother. She was smiling, but her eyes looked tired. I never knew her. I never knew my father. The story I was given was simple, sterile, and repeated so often it felt like a fact from a textbook. Parents deceased, no known relatives. I was found, I was placed, I was raised. End of chapter. The front doors of St. Jude's sighed shut behind me, the sound of a final indifferent exhalation. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of coming rain and damp leaves. I stood on the cracked pavement, the box digging into my hip, and felt a dizzying, terrifying wave of silence. For 12 years, my life had been scheduled by bells. A bell to wake, a bell for meals, a bell for school, a bell for lights out. Now the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of wind in the nearly bare trees. I was free, and I had never been more afraid in my life. The bus ride was a blur of unfamiliar streets, faces I didn't recognize, a world that had been happening all this time, just outside the brick walls of my entire existence. I was headed downtown, to an address scrawled on a piece of paper inside the envelope. A Mr. Henderson, a lawyer. The note from the director of St. Jude's was brief. A small matter of an inheritance has come to our attention. You are to report to this office upon your release. Inheritance. The word felt foreign, like something from a movie. People like me didn't have inheritances. We had case files and government stipends that ran out the second we were old enough to be pushed out the door. I assumed it was a mistake or a formality, maybe a forgotten savings bond worth $50, a final bureaucratic loose end to be tied up. The law office was in an old, grand-looking building with a revolving door that I hesitated in front of for a full minute before pushing my way through. Mr. Henderson's office was on the 7th floor. It was quiet, smelled of old paper and lemon polish, and was filled with dark wood and leather-bound books. It was the kind of room that made you feel you should be apologizing for taking up space in it. Mr. Henderson himself was a man who seemed to match the room. He was older, with kind, tired eyes behind thick glasses, and a suit that was probably older than I was, but looked more dignified. He didn't stand up when I came in, just gestured to the worn leather chair opposite his massive desk. "Leo," he said, his voice calm and even. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." I sat, placing the box on the floor beside me. It felt small and pathetic in that grand room. "I was told to come here," I said, my own voice sounding thin and young. He nodded, folding his hands on the desk. "I know this must be a confusing day for you. I was your grandfather's lawyer. His name was Arthur." The name hit me like a physical blow. Arthur, a name, a person, a grandfather. "I don't have a grandfather," I said, the words coming out automatically, the official story hardwired into my brain. "My file says no known relatives." Mr. Henderson gave me a sad, sympathetic look. Files can be incomplete, Leo, or sometimes they contain information that is deliberately simplified. Your grandfather passed away 2 weeks ago. He left you everything. He slid a thick, heavy envelope across the polished surface of the desk. My name was written on the front in shaky, elegant handwriting. Everything. The word echoed in the silent room. Everything of nothing is still nothing, I thought. A few $100s, maybe? Some old furniture in a storage unit? What is everything? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His property, Mr. Henderson said, leaning back in his chair. A house and about 50 acres of land, upstate, near a town called Northwood. It's rural, very quiet. I stared at him, trying to process the words. A house, land. It didn't make sense. If I had a grandfather with a house, why was I at St. Jude's? Why did he leave me there for 12 years? The anger came first, a hot, bitter wave rising in my chest. Why, I asked, the single word sharp and accusatory. If he was there all this time, why was I in that place? Mr. Henderson sighed, a long, weary sound. That is a question I cannot fully answer, Leo. Arthur was a very private man. He was also complicated. He made arrangements with me years ago. The instructions were very clear. I was not to contact you, and the state was not to be informed of his existence until your 18th birthday. He wanted you to be a man, free of the system, before you had to deal with his world. His world. What did that even mean? It sounded ominous, heavy. The lawyer slid another document across the desk, a deed. It had my name on it, Leo Vance, and under it, the address in Northwood. There was also a set of old iron keys, heavy and ornate, tied together with a piece of twine. The property is yours, free and clear, he continued. The taxes are paid up for the year. There is a small bank account associated with the estate, enough for essentials for a few months. It's all detailed in these papers. He tapped a thick folder. However, there is one other matter. I looked up from the keys in my hand. They felt impossibly real, impossibly heavy. A development corporation, West Hill Holdings, has been trying to buy your grandfather's land for some time. They want to build a resort. His property is the last piece they need to acquire the entire valley. They made him a significant offer before he passed. Now that you are the owner, that offer extends to you. He named a number. It was a number so large, so astronomical, that it didn't even sound like real money. It was the kind of number you read about in newspapers, attached to people who lived in a different universe. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That amount of money could buy 100 new lives. It could erase every single hungry night, every hand-me-down pair of shoes, every moment of feeling like I was worth less than the air I breathed. They will likely contact you soon, Mr. Henderson said, pulling me from my daze. My professional advice is to consider it. The house is old, likely in disrepair. The land is undeveloped. Taking the offer would give you a fresh start, a very comfortable one. A fresh start. It was all I had ever wanted. A way to leave Leo, ward of the state, behind for good. I could go anywhere, be anyone. But then I looked at the envelope with my name on it, in that shaky, unfamiliar hand. And I looked at the keys. A house, a grandfather, a story I was never told. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my gut. But now it was mixed with something else. A deep, aching curiosity, a need to know. I want to see it first, I said, the words surprising me as much as they seemed to surprise him. The house, I want to go there. Mr. Henderson studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I thought you might, he said. Arthur would have wanted you to. He always said the land had a way of speaking for itself. He gave me a bus schedule and a hand-drawn map. Northwood was a 6-hour ride away, a tiny dot on the map that looked like it was in the middle of nowhere. As I stood to leave, my box in one hand and the envelope of my new life in the other, he said one last thing. "Leo, your grandfather, he wasn't a simple man. Don't be too quick to judge what you find, or what you don't find." I nodded, unable to speak. I walked out of that quiet, polished office and back into the loud, gray city. But now everything was different. I was no longer just a boy with a box. I was a boy with a house, a boy with a past I never knew existed, and I was on my way to find it. The bus smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I sat by a window, watching the city's concrete and steel bleed into sprawling suburbs, and then into the browning fields of late autumn. The farther we got from the city, the more the trees crowded the highway, their branches skeletal against the darkening sky. I held the thick envelope in my lap, tracing the letters of my name. I hadn't opened it yet. It felt too heavy, too final. It was a conversation 12 years too late, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. What could he possibly say? What excuse could there be for leaving a child to be raised by strangers, to feel utterly and completely alone in the world? Every mile the bus traveled, the anger simmered. It was easier than the grief. Anger was a shield. Grief was a hole you fell into. I had spent my whole life learning not to fall. Night fell, and the world outside the window became a series of flashing lights and deep, impenetrable darkness. We passed through small towns, their main streets decorated with faded harvest festival banners. Each lighted window I saw was a glimpse into a life that wasn't mine. Families at dinner tables, people watching TV, the warm, ordinary glow of belonging. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a world I could see, but never touch. It was nearly midnight when the bus driver called out, "Northwood!" I was the only one who got off. The bus stop was just a small, covered bench on the side of a 2-lane road, across from a gas station whose lights cast a lonely, buzzing halo in the misty air. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend, and the silence that descended was deeper and more absolute than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the presence of something else. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of wind in the pines, the immense quiet weight of the mountains that I could feel more than see, looming in the darkness around me. I checked the hand-drawn map under the gas station's flickering fluorescent light. My grandfather's property was about 2 miles down a smaller, unpaved road off the main highway. 2 miles felt like 100 in the pitch black, with only the faint light of a crescent moon to guide me. I started walking, my city shoes crunching on the gravel shoulder. The air grew colder, cleaner, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. It was a smell from a different planet. After about 20 minutes, I found the turnoff, marked by a faded wooden sign that was too weathered to read. The road was little more than a dirt track, disappearing into a tunnel of overhanging trees. I hesitated. This was it, the final stretch. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to take the first bus out in the morning, to call Mr. Henderson and take the money. The money was safe. It was clean. It had no ghosts. But my feet moved forward as if pulled by a current I couldn't fight. The walk was eerie. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and every snap of a twig in the woods sounded like a footstep. I held the heavy iron keys in my pocket, my knuckles white, the metal cold against my skin. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trees opened up into a clearing, and there it was, the house. It was a silhouette against the star-dusted sky, larger than I had imagined. A 2-story farmhouse with a steep-pitched roof and a wide wrap-around porch. It looked dark, abandoned, a hollowed-out shape full of forgotten time. A sagging fence marked the edge of the yard, which was overgrown with weeds that brushed against my legs, As I walked toward the front door, the place felt asleep, waiting. I climbed the creaking wooden steps of the porch, the sound echoing in the profound stillness. I found the keyhole by feel, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the lock plate. I chose the largest, most ornate key. It slid into the lock with a rusty scrape. For a moment, it wouldn't turn. I put my shoulder into the door, pushing as I twisted the key with all my strength. There was a loud, groaning clunk as the old lock gave way. The door swung inward on a long, complaining creak, opening into a darkness that was thicker and more absolute than the night outside. It smelled of dust, of cold ashes in a fireplace, of decaying paper and something else, something faintly sweet and spicy like dried herbs. I stood on the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. I was standing in my grandfather's house. My house. The words felt unreal. Using the flashlight on the cheap phone I'd been given at St. Jude's, I swept a beam of light across the room. It was a living room filled with shapes draped in white sheets, like a congregation of ghosts. A sofa, armchairs, tables, all preserved under a layer of fine gray dust. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth black and empty. To my left, a staircase led up to the second floor. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floorboards. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the night. The silence inside was different. It was a silence that was full of history, of unspoken words, of a life lived within these walls. I walked through the downstairs, my light beam cutting through the gloom. A dining room with a long table, a kitchen with old cast-iron pans still hanging on the wall. Everything was neat, orderly, but covered in the same uniform layer of dust, a testament to the slow, quiet passage of time since anyone had last lived here. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum of a life I'd never known. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, some sign of him, some clue as to who this man, Arthur, really was. But the house was impersonal, scrubbed clean of any real personality by the dust sheets and the emptiness. I eventually found a light switch in the kitchen that, to my surprise, worked. A single bare bulb flickered on, casting a weak yellow glow that made the shadows deeper and the dust motes dance in the air. In the kitchen, on a small round table, was a single plate and a coffee cup, sitting in the sink as if left there after a final breakfast. That one small detail, that simple human act, was the first thing that made him feel real. He had sat here, he had eaten, he had lived. I wasn't ready to face the upstairs yet. I wasn't ready to see his bedroom. Instead, I sat down at that dusty kitchen table, the $75 from the state, feeling like a joke in my pocket. I owned this whole silent, ghost-filled house. The thought was so overwhelming I felt sick. I finally picked up the envelope Mr. Henderson had given me. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside was not one letter but a small stack of them, bound with a faded red ribbon, and a smaller sealed envelope marked "Read this first." I opened it. The handwriting was the same as on the front, but stronger, less shaky. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I know you have questions. I know you are probably angry. You have every right to be. The answers you are looking for are not all in these letters. The most important ones are in this house, this land. It is all I have to give you, and it is more than it appears. Start in the attic. The past is always stored in the attic. Be careful who you trust. The world is not what it seems. Your loving grandfather, Arthur." The attic. The past is always stored in the attic. The words sent a shiver down my spine. The letter was dated 2 years ago. He knew he was dying. He had been preparing for this, for me, for a long time. Suddenly, the weariness that had settled deep in my bones vanished. replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I had to know. I had to see what he had hidden up there. I found the stairs and took them two at a time, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. The second floor had 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. One bedroom was sparse, clearly a guest room. The other was his. The bed was neatly made. A pair of worn leather boots stood by the door. On the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses lay next to a book. It felt like an invasion walking into that room. It was his private space and I was a stranger, but I wasn't here for the bedroom. At the end of the hallway, a simple cord hung from a square panel in the ceiling, the entrance to the attic. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached up, my fingers closing around the rough, dusty cord, and pulled. The panel groaned in protest, then swung down with a cloud of ancient dust, revealing a set of rickety, folding wooden stairs. A wave of cold, musty air washed over me. It smelled like secrets. I climbed the ladder, each step creaking under my weight. I pushed my head and shoulders up into the darkness, sweeping my phone's light around. The attic was huge, running the entire length of the house. The air was thick and still. Rafters crisscrossed above me, draped in cobwebs that looked like spun silver in the light. The floor was covered in old newspapers, and the space was filled with forgotten things. An old rocking horse, a stack of trunks, a dressmaker's dummy standing like a headless sentinel in the corner. In the very center of the attic, directly under the peak of the roof, was a single large wooden chest. It wasn't covered in dust like everything else. It was clean, as if it had been recently placed there or tended to. It had a heavy iron lock, but there was a small brass key already in it. It was waiting for me. I walked toward it, my footsteps loud in the tomb-like silence. I knelt on the dusty floorboards and put my hand on the lid of the chest. The wood was smooth, cool to the touch. This was it, the reason he sent me here. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of decay and time, and I turned the key. The lock clicked open with a satisfying solid sound. Lifting the heavy lid, I shone my light inside. It wasn't filled with gold or treasure. It was filled with paper, stacks and stacks of journals, bound in leather, dozens of them. And on top of the first journal was another letter, this one much longer, in a sealed envelope addressed simply to Leo. This was the real story, not the clean, simple version from the state, not the partial explanation from the lawyer. This was the truth, straight from the source. I sat there on the floor of that dark, silent attic, and I began to read. "My dearest boy," the letter started, the handwriting familiar now. "I am writing this in the hope that you will one day understand. I don't ask for forgiveness, only that you listen to my story before you make your choice. Because a choice is coming, Leo. A choice between the past and the future, between money and meaning. I pray I have raised a man who can see the difference." The letter went on to explain. He hadn't abandoned me out of malice or indifference. He had hidden me. My father, his son, had gotten involved with dangerous people, not just criminals, but powerful men who operated in the gray areas between business and crime. My father had been their accountant, and he had discovered something, evidence of massive fraud, bribery, things that could send these men to prison for the rest of their lives. He had decided to become a witness, but before he could, he and my mother died in a car accident, an accident that my grandfather was certain was no accident at all. They were silenced. And suddenly, I, a 6-year-old boy, was the only loose end. The men my father was going to testify against were part of a vast network, and one of their primary businesses was land development. They operated under a shell corporation called West Hill Holdings, the name from Mr. Henderson's office. A chill, colder than the attic air, snaked its way up my spine. They weren't just a company that wanted to build a resort. They were the men who had likely killed my parents. and for 12 years my grandfather had been playing a long, quiet game to protect me. He knew they would come looking for anything my father might have hidden. He couldn't keep me with him. It would have put a target on my back. So he did the only thing he could think of to make me disappear. He erased himself from my life, paid off the right people to have my records sealed and simplified, and let me be swallowed by the one place they would never look for the heir to my father's secrets, the state orphanage system. He let the world think I was a nobody, an orphan with no connections, no history, no inheritance. It was the only way to keep me alive until I was an adult, legally my own man, with the power to make my own decisions. The house, the land, it wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. It was the one thing he owned that they couldn't touch, bought and paid for long before my father got into trouble. And it was where he hid the evidence. "The proof is here, Leo," he wrote. "Everything your father found, the ledgers, the documents, the copies he made, it's all here on this land. I couldn't risk putting it in a bank. I couldn't trust anyone. I buried it. In the journals, you will find my life story, my memories of your father, the things I wish I could have told you. But in the very last journal, the one at the bottom of the chest, you will find a map. It will lead you to what your father died for." I sat there in the dusty silence, the letter trembling in my hands. My entire life, my entire identity had been a lie, a carefully constructed shield. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. The anger that had been my constant companion for 12 years dissolved, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. I cried. I cried for the grandfather I never knew, a man who had sacrificed his final years, living alone in this silent house, watching me from a distance, all to keep me safe. I cried for the parents I couldn't remember, who died trying to do the right thing. And I cried for the lost boy in the orphanage, who had spent so many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering why no one in the world wanted him. The pieces all clicked into place. West Hill Holdings didn't just want the land. They wanted to bulldoze it, dig it up, and destroy whatever secrets were buried here, just in case. The money they were offering wasn't a generous offer. It was a bribe. It was hush money for a crime I never even knew had been committed. I looked at the stacks of journals in the chest, a lifetime of my grandfather's thoughts, his memories, and at the bottom, a map, a legacy of truth. The choice he wrote about was suddenly crystal clear. I could take the money, let them destroy this place, and walk away. I could be rich, safe, and anonymous. Or I could stay. I could find what my father had hidden. I could fight for the truth. It was the choice between an easy life and a meaningful one. The weight of it all settled on me. I was just a kid, 18 years old with $75 and a box of old clothes. How could I possibly take on a powerful, ruthless corporation? They had lawyers, money, influence. They had already killed 2 people. What could I possibly do? I spent the rest of the night in that attic reading. I didn't read the last journal with the map, not yet. I started from the beginning. I read about my grandfather's childhood, about meeting my grandmother, about the day my father was born. His words were simple, honest, and full of a love so deep it ached. He wrote about my father as a boy, climbing the very trees I could see outside the attic window. He described my mother, her laugh, the way she loved to paint. He was giving me back the family I never had, page by page. As dawn broke, casting pale gray light through the single dusty window in the attic, I found an entry from 12 years ago, the day he took me to the orphanage. "Today was the hardest day of my life," he wrote. "I left my heart on the steps of that cold brick building. I told him I would be back. A lie that tasted like poison. But every time I look at his face, I see his father, and I know I am doing the right thing. I will watch him from afar. I will be his silent guardian, and I will make sure that when the time comes, He has a place to come home to. This house will wait for him. This land will keep his inheritance safe. One day he will know he was not abandoned. He was loved. I closed the journal, the old leather cool against my skin. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. The house wasn't empty. It was full of his love, his sacrifice. The land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was a vault, guarding my family's honor. I knew what I had to do. I went downstairs, my legs stiff from sitting for so long. The house looked different in the morning light. It wasn't menacing or sad. It was sturdy, resilient. It had been waiting. My cheap phone rang, the sound jarring and alien in the quiet house. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. I answered. "Is this Leo Vance?" a smooth, professional voice asked. "Yes," I said, my own voice steady. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a representative for West Hill Holdings. I believe a Mr. Henderson may have spoken to you about our interest in your grandfather's property." "He did," I said. "Excellent. We're prepared to renew our previous offer. In fact, given the circumstances, we're willing to increase it by 10%. We can have the paperwork drawn up today, money in your account within the week. You'd be free to start a new life, anywhere you want, no strings attached." The offer hung in the air, seductive and simple. No strings attached. He had no idea how many strings there were. They were wrapped around my entire history, my family, my very identity. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thorne," I said, looking out the kitchen window at the 50 acres of land that held my past and my future. "But the property is not for sale." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The silence was heavy, laced with surprise and, I thought, a hint of annoyance. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice losing some of its manufactured charm, "perhaps you don't understand. This is a life-changing amount of money. The property is isolated. The house is in a state of serious disrepair. It will cost you a fortune just to make it habitable. Are you sure you've thought this through?" "I'm sure," I said. "My grandfather left me this place. I intend to stay." "That would be unwise," he said, the words no longer a suggestion but a thinly veiled threat. "This project is very important to a lot of very powerful people. It would be a shame for a young man like you to find himself in a difficult position." I thought of my grandfather, living alone here for all those years, facing down that pressure every day. I thought of my father who had faced it and paid the ultimate price. My fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but my resolve was like steel. "Thank you for your concern," I said, and I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was my own. I had made my choice. Now the real work began. I spent the next few days taking stock of my new life. The house was indeed in disrepair. The roof leaked in one corner of the kitchen. The plumbing was temperamental, and a fine layer of dust seemed to regenerate no matter how much I swept. But it was solid. The foundation was stone, the beams were thick, hand-hewn timber. It was built to last. I used some of the money from the estate's bank account to buy groceries in town and some basic cleaning supplies. Northwood was a small, quiet place. The people at the general store were curious but polite, giving me slow nods and watching me with cautious eyes. I was an outsider, the ghost from the old Vance place. I knew it would take time to earn any kind of trust here. My days were spent working on the house, cleaning out the grime of a decade of neglect. I threw open the windows, letting the crisp autumn air chase out the stale smell of time. I took down the dust sheets, revealing sturdy, simple furniture that had been crafted with care. Slowly, painstakingly, I was turning a museum back into a home. Each night I would read more of my grandfather's journals. They were my only company, his voice a quiet murmur in the silent house. I learned about his courtship with my grandmother, their struggles to build this farm from nothing. I read about his political arguments with his neighbors, his love for fishing in the creek that ran through the property, his quiet observations on the changing seasons. He was becoming more real to me than most of the living people I had ever known. I was learning what it meant to have roots. But I didn't touch the last journal. I didn't look at the map. I knew that once I did, everything would change. Once I started that search, I would be officially at war with West Hill Holdings. I was terrified. I needed to be ready. I needed to feel like this place was truly mine to defend. One afternoon, a week after I'd arrived, a sleek black car I didn't recognize rolled up my long, unpaved driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Marcus Thorne. He got out of the car, dressed in an expensive suit that looked ridiculously out of place against the backdrop of my overgrown yard and peeling paint. "Mr. Vance," he said, walking toward me with a confident stride, his smile perfectly polished. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by, see if you'd had a chance to reconsider our generous offer." "I haven't," I said, standing my ground on the porch. I had been fixing a loose floorboard, and I held the hammer in my hand. It felt reassuringly heavy. He surveyed the house, his gaze lingering on the peeling paint and the sagging porch rail. "Look at this place," he said with a condescending chuckle. "It's a relic, a money pit. We're offering you a kingdom, and you're choosing to live in a ruin. Why?" "It's my home," I said simply. His smile tightened. "Your grandfather was a stubborn old man. He didn't understand progress. Don't make the same mistake. Our offer is still on the table for now, but it won't be there forever. And believe me, this valley is going to be developed. One way or another. It would be much more pleasant for you if you were a part of that future, rather than an obstacle to it." He slid a business card out of his jacket and tried to hand it to me. "Think about it. A new car, a new city. No more hammers and nails." I didn't take the card. I just looked at him. I saw the hollowness in his eyes, the predatory gleam of a man who only understood value in terms of dollars. He saw a ruin. I saw a legacy. "I think you should leave," I said, my voice low and even. He held my gaze for a long moment, his mask of civility finally slipping. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "You'll regret this," he said, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. He turned, got back in his shiny car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, the hammer still in my hand. The fear was back, colder and sharper this time. He was right. They were powerful. I was one person, a boy really, in a rundown house. But then I looked at the house, my house, and I thought of the journals upstairs. I thought of my grandfather's sacrifice. I wasn't just one person. I was the keeper of a story. I was the guardian of a truth, and I was not going to run. That night, I knew it was time. I went up to the attic, the air still and cold. I opened the chest, my hands steady now. I took out the very last journal from the bottom. It felt different from the others. The leather was more worn, the pages filled with more than just words. There were sketches, diagrams, calculations, and tucked into a pocket inside the back cover was a folded piece of parchment, the map. I carried it downstairs to the kitchen table and carefully unfolded it under the single bare bulb. It was a hand-drawn map of the 50 acres. It was incredibly detailed, showing the creek, the old stone walls that crisscrossed the property, the stands of ancient oak and pine, and on it, marked with a red X, was a spot deep in the woods, near a distinctive rock formation my grandfather had labeled the Old Man's Shoulder. Below the X were a series of notes. 7 feet down, below the iron plate, your father was a clever man. He knew they'd look for a safe. He knew they'd look for something hidden in the house. He never thought they'd dig up a field. My father, he had buried it himself before he was killed. He had been trying to protect the evidence, and in doing so, he had created the one thing that could bring his killers to justice. This was his true inheritance. Not the house, not the land, but this chance, this responsibility. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I found a rusty but solid-looking shovel and a pickaxe in the old barn behind the house. I packed a bag with water, some food, and the map. And I started walking into the woods. The forest was dense, the autumn leaves crunching under my boots. It was my land. Every tree, every rock. The thought was still new, still powerful. It took me nearly an hour to find the rock formation. It was a massive outcropping of granite that, from the right angle, did look like the stooped shoulder of an old man. It was exactly as it was drawn on the map. I stood there for a moment, the shovel in my hand, my heart pounding. This was it, the point of no return. I found the spot marked with the X, and I started to dig. The work was brutal. The ground was hard, packed clay, filled with rocks and roots. My hands, soft from years of indoor life, were raw and blistered within the first hour. Sweat poured down my face, my muscles screaming in protest. Every time a car passed on the distant highway, I froze, convinced it was Thorne and his people coming to stop me. But no one came. It was just me, the woods, and the ghosts of my family urging me on. Hours passed. The sun climbed high overhead, filtering down through the canopy of leaves. I dug deeper and deeper, the hole growing wider and more imposing. I hit rock after rock, prying them out with the pickaxe, my body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt like it was in my bones. I was starting to lose hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the map was a decoy. Maybe my grandfather was just a crazy old man, and I was a fool digging a hole in the middle of nowhere. But then, late in the afternoon, when the light was beginning to fade and my body was about to give out, the shovel hit something that wasn't a rock. It made a dull, metallic clang. My heart stopped. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the dirt with my bare, bleeding hands. I uncovered the edge of a flat, rusted piece of metal, an iron plate, just like he'd written. Adrenaline surged through me, washing away the fatigue. I used the pickaxe to pry at the edges of the plate. It was heavy, wedged deep in the earth. It took every last ounce of my strength, but finally, with a great groan of protest, it shifted. I lifted it away, and there, nestled in the dark earth beneath it, was a heavy, waterproofed metal box. I lifted it out of the hole. It was sealed with a heavy latch. I used the end of the pickaxe to break it open. I lifted the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved, were several thick ledgers and a stack of documents in a sealed oilcloth pouch. I opened one of the ledgers. The pages were filled with my father's neat, precise handwriting, columns of numbers, dates, names, transfers of money. It was all there, a detailed, undeniable record of West Hill's criminal enterprise, bribery, money laundering, illegal dumping. It was the evidence that had cost him his life. And now it was in my hands. I sat there in the dirt next to the hole I had dug, and I held my father's legacy. I had a choice to make. I could take this box to the authorities, expose West Hill, and plunge myself into a dangerous, uncertain legal battle. Or I could rebury it, walk away, and pretend I never found it. I could still call Thorne, tell him I'd changed my mind. The money would still be there, safety would still be there. But as I looked at my father's handwriting, I knew that wasn't a choice at all. It never had been. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about them, about the truth. I carried the box back to the house as darkness fell. It was heavy, but it was a good weight, a weight of purpose. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and spent the entire night on the kitchen table, going through every single page. I didn't understand all of it, the complex accounting, the legal jargon, but I understood enough. I saw the names of politicians they had bribed. I saw the records of toxic waste being illegally dumped on land they were developing. I saw the proof of what they were beyond any doubt. The next day I called Mr. Henderson. I didn't use my phone. I drove into a neighboring town and used a payphone, my grandfather's paranoia now feeling like common sense. "Leo," he said, his voice sounding surprised. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I found it," I said, my voice quiet. "I found what my father hid." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, sober, grave. "Leo, you need to listen to me very carefully. Do not talk to anyone else. Do not go to the local police. These people have deep connections. Where are you now?" I told him. "Stay put," he said. "I'm coming to you. I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon. Don't open the door for anyone." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I hid the box back in the attic chest, burying it under the journals. I sat in the living room, in the dark, just waiting. I thought about what I was doing. I was 18 years old. I should have been thinking about college or a job or a girlfriend. Instead, I was sitting in a dark house guarding a box of evidence against killers, waiting for a lawyer who was my only ally in the world. And yet, I wasn't scared. Not really. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I was Arthur's grandson, I was my father's son, and I was home. Mr. Henderson arrived the next afternoon, just as he'd promised. He looked tired, older than he had in his fancy office. He brought 2 large briefcases with him. "Show me," he said, as soon as I let him in. We went up to the attic and I showed him the box. He spent hours going through the documents, his face a mask of concentration. When he was finally done, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a new respect. "Your father was a brave man," he said, "and your grandfather was a genius. This is a smoking gun. It's more than enough." "Enough for what?" I asked. "Enough to burn their entire empire to the ground," he said. "But it's going to be a fight. They will come after you, Leo. They will try to discredit you, to threaten you, to buy you. Are you ready for that?" I thought of the night I spent in the bus station, a scared kid with a cardboard box. I thought of the first time I saw this house, a dark silhouette against the stars. I thought of my grandfather's words in his journals. "I'm ready," I said. "Good," Mr. Henderson nodded, "because you're not in this alone." He explained the plan. He had contacts, people he trusted at the state and federal level, journalists who couldn't be bought. We would make copies, we would distribute them. We would make the story so big, so public that they couldn't bury it. The fight wasn't quick and it wasn't easy. The moment the story broke, my life turned upside down. News vans camped at the end of my driveway. My face was on television. West Hill Holdings threw everything they had at me. Their lawyers called me a liar, a delusional teenager trying to extort money. They launched investigations into my past, trying to dig up dirt that wasn't there. There were threats, veiled and direct. Cars would park on the road outside my house at night, their engines idling, just letting me know they were there. There were moments of doubt, moments when the fear was so intense I could barely breathe. In those moments, I would go up to the attic and read my grandfather's journals. I would walk the land, my land, and feel the strength of the trees and the earth. I was not alone. Mr. Henderson was a rock, guiding me through the legal minefield. And something else happened. The people in Northwood who had at first been suspicious of me started to change. They had seen West Hill's tactics before. They had seen the company bully other landowners. They started to see me not as an outsider, but as one of their own, fighting a common enemy. An old farmer down the road started showing up with vegetables from his garden, leaving them on my porch. The woman who ran the general store would slip an extra loaf of bread into my bag and refuse payment. They were small gestures, but they meant the world. They were community. They were acceptance. The legal battle raged for almost a year. but the evidence my father had collected was too meticulous, too damning. One by one, the pillars of West Hill's empire began to crumble. Executives were indicted. Politicians resigned in disgrace. The truth, once it was out, had a power all its own. In the end, West Hill Holdings was dissolved, its assets frozen. The resort was never built. The valley was safe. Marcus Thorne and his bosses went to prison. Justice, slow and grinding, had finally been served. The day the final verdict came in, I was standing on my porch, looking out at the land. Mr. Henderson called me with the news. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a quiet sense of peace. I had finished the story my father had started. I had honored the sacrifice my grandfather had made. I stayed in the house. It was my home now, truly mine. I used some of the money from a victim's compensation fund to fix the roof and the plumbing. I painted the walls. I started a garden. I learned the names of the trees and the birds. I wasn't just living on the land. I was a part of it. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of my own life. Sometimes I still go up to the attic. I open the chest. The journals are still there. I read them, and I remember. I remember the fear and the loneliness, but I also remember the moment I made a choice, the moment I decided to fight for something more than just myself. Inheritance, I've learned, isn't about money or property. It's about the stories we're given and the choices we make with them. My grandfather didn't leave me a house. He left me a legacy of courage. My father didn't leave me a box of evidence. He left me a responsibility to the truth. That's the real treasure, and it's something no amount of money can ever buy. And that's what I want to leave you with today. We all have a story. We all have moments where we have to choose between the easy path and the right one, between what the world wants to give us and what our heart tells us we need to fight for. Your inheritance might not be a house or a box of secrets. It might be a lesson learned from a parent, a strength you found in a moment of hardship, a promise you made to yourself. Whatever it is, it's yours. It's the foundation you can build your life on. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with a choice you've had to make in your own life, I'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. This community is a place for people who understand that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to build on your own foundation. It's the only one that truly matters.